Okay, so good morning, everybody. Sina, good morning. I see you're behind your screen.
Morning.
Okay, so we are up to chapter 42. Sorry for the break last week. Just we had a schedule conflict, but Baruch Hashem, now we're back on track. So I think everybody may have had a lot of time to contemplate on what we learned in chapter 41 to be able to segue into chapter 42, which is really a continuation of the theme of Yiras Hashem, fear and awe of Hashem. The fear and awe that we are speaking about in these chapters of God is not fear of punishment, because fear of punishment is a self-centered fear. You're worried about yourself. The fear of Hashem that we are discussing in these chapters is still considered to be a low-level fear, but it is not a self-centered fear. It is a God-centered fear. Kabbalah's oil, accepting upon oneself the yoke of heaven. Yirat Shamayim, fear of heaven. All these words are God-centered, not self-centered. Now, the previous chapter, chapter 41, which is a very fundamental chapter in Tanya, spoke about the fact of Yira, this component of fear and awe, especially of Hashem's authority, being a very necessary component even of the fulfillment of positive commandments. Usually we think that we do positive commandments out of a love of God, and we don't transgress negative commandments out of a fear of God. However, last chapter we learned in chapter 41 how fear of God is actually the foundation of even the positive commandments, and also for our mitzvahs, for our fulfillment of mitzvahs, to be considered serving Hashem, an act of service, they have to include a component of fear. And to explain this, the Alter Rebbe explained in chapter 41 how when a son serves his parents, he does things for his parents, it's because you are close to your parents. You are close to your father, so this brings you to do things, acts of love for your parents. When we feel close to Hashem, this brings us a longing for Hashem, and it brings my reality closer to Hashem's reality, which is very nice and very necessary and very important for us to have love of Hashem. But chapter 41 explained how the avodah of an eved, of a servant of God, my reality is not important. The only reality that exists is Hashem's reality, and I do His will with no thought of myself. And that's the meaning of fear of Hashem. And of course, the last chapter gave us tools and techniques to reach this level, which we're actually in the middle of discussing, but the Alter Rebbe gave us a contemplation, a meditation, if you want to call it that way, of meditating and contemplating upon Hashem's great might and power, how he fills all worlds and he transcends all worlds, and yet he chooses to identify with the Jewish nation, and he chooses us individuals in particular. And that was the pasuk that we mentioned, V'hinei Hashem nitzav olav, and he knows exactly what's going on in our thoughts and minds. And when we contemplate on these elements, this brings about, reveals a natural low level. I say low level not because it's not good, but because there is a higher level to reach, but a yira tata'a, low level fear of God in order to serve Hashem. Now, to reach this level, even though it's considered, according to Tanya, low level, Yirat HaTorah, it actually seems pretty complicated. It's not so easy for the common person to reach. And why is that? Is because people are usually scared of what they see, right? If you're scared of animals or a lion or a thief or a terrorist, chas v'shalom, it's because you see that person in front of you. You see the threat. It's obvious. But Hashem is concealed. So that's why it seems just a little bit harder to attain. So why is it that in Parshas Devarim, when Moshe Rabbeinu was speaking to the nation of Israel, he said, "V'ata Yisrael." Now listen, nation of Israel. Ma Hashem elekecha sha'al mimcha. What does Hashem want from you? He doesn't want too much. Ki im leyira es Hashem elekecha. He wants you, the only thing he wants from you is to fear Hashem, your God. And the Gemara asks on this statement, this pasuk in Parshas Devar, in Chumash Devarim, I mean, it sounds like Moshe Rabbeinu is just saying, well, this is a very simple thing to attain. It's just a small thing that Hashem wants of you. Is yira such a small thing? Is fear of God such a small thing to attain? And the answer, which requires explanation in the Gemara and which the Alter Rebbe brings in this chapter, is that yes, for Moshe Rabbeinu, it was a simple thing. Now, that's a little bit confusing because Moshe Rabbeinu was speaking to the nation and he was saying, Hashem wants of you to fear him. And the Gemara says, yes, because fear of God was very easy for Moshe. How does that apply to us? And with that, the Alter Rebbe brings in this chapter, and there are a lot of beautiful concepts in this chapter, really and truly, like beautiful nuggets to unpack and to reflect upon. With this, the Alter Rebbe brings a very important concept in Yiddishkeit, and that is that every Jew has a spark in his neshama, and from Moshe Rabbeinu. Every Jew has an element, a part of his neshama, which comes from Moshe Rabbeinu, who was one of the 7 shepherds of Israel. Who were considered to be the 7 shepherds of Israel? Well, the 3 patriarchs, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Aaron, David HaMelech, and Shlomo HaMelech, and of course Moshe Rabbeinu. 7 shepherds of Israel. Why were they called shepherds? Because just as a shepherd takes care of their flock, the shepherds of Israel brought life and godliness to every Jew. Now, very interestingly enough, the Alter Rebbe mentions life and godliness. There's this letter in the middle that is the and the Rebbe tells us in his commentaries that the Alter Rebbe contemplated for many, many months if he should say godly life or life and godliness. And then the Rebbe goes into explaining that life and godliness are 2 separate things. That's why the Alter Rebbe decided to separate them. But this is just a side point. Life is the ability to realize that our life comes from Hashem and the ability to love and fear Hashem. And godliness refers to the ability to nullify ourselves in front of Hashem. But regardless of which, who brings these abilities to us? The leaders of Israel, the shepherds of our flock, which Moshe Rabbeinu, who spoke to the nation and told the nation, Hashem wants you to fear him. For him, it was easy, and he also gave us the ability. He also gave us the ability to be able to attain this level of fear. So when the Gemara says, is fear such a small thing? Yes, for Moshe Rabbeinu, it was small. That is because one way of attaining this fear of Hashem, one way of attaining this level of fear of Hashem is attaching ourselves to Moshe Rabbeinu. And what does that mean? Moshe Rabbeinu, we know there's Chachma, Bina, and Das. So Chachma is a concept, Bina is the understanding, the chewing it over, the effort one puts into understanding the concept. Das is when you connect with the knowledge that you have learned. And Moshe Rabbeinu and all the leaders of Israel bring the concept of Das to the nation, brings the concept of Das, brings us the ability to connect with the intellectual knowledge that we attain of knowing Hashem, of knowing godliness, and therefore producing the emotions of love and fear of Hashem. And even if you were to think that you are not capable of this, you don't have the intellectual capacity, maybe your neshama, we don't know this, but maybe your neshama doesn't come from a high level necessarily. Different neshamas come from different places. If we only connect to the Moshe Rabbeinu, and every generation, the Alter Rebbe tells us, has a Moshe Rabbeinu in that generation that descends into a soul and body, there is the soul of Moshe Rabbeinu, not just the soul, but also goes into the body. There's a tzaddik in every generation, which represents the Moshe Rabbeinu of that generation. One's Yiras Hashem is strengthened by connecting to the leader of the generation. Now, interestingly, the Alter Rebbe emphasizes that the soul of Moshe Rabbeinu comes down and is enclosed in the soul and bodies of tzaddikim, which gives us to understand that merely by looking at a tzaddik, we don't have to see their soul, we don't have to understand the tzaddik's ways, we have to look at a tzaddik, and here's a technique that the Alter Rebbe gives us, which is pretty easy. By looking at a tzaddik, our Yiras Hashem becomes strengthened. Now, interestingly about Moshe Rabbeinu, as compared to the other six shepherds, right? Because there were 7 tzaddikim who were considered to be the shepherds of Israel, and then in each generation there is a tzaddik that is considered to be the expression of Moshe Rabbeinu in that generation. Moshe Rabbeinu was different to the other tzaddikim because Moshe Rabbeinu's light shone from the day he was born. You know, in Moshe Rabbeinu's home, there was Amram, his father, who was the leader of the generation. There was Miriam, who was a prophetess. There was his brother Aaron, who was going to be the future Kohen Gadol. Those were all very lofty souls, and their souls did shine as well. And the Torah does not tell us about their souls that, oh, their souls shone. But Moshe Rabbeinu, the day he was born, an added increased light came into the home, which means that his soul shone even more and above any other tzaddik. And I just want to point out that just as Moshe Rabbeinu was the 7th generation from Avram Avinu, the Rebbe is also the 7th generation, Dor Hashvi. The leader of the generation inspires da'as of Hashem, knowledge of Hashem. He teaches the generation. And through this knowledge and through connecting to this knowledge, we have a proportional amount of ahava and yira. So however much you learn and however much you connect with that learning, that is how much love and fear of God you can produce. In other words, it's in proportion to how much you learn and how much you connect and how much you contemplate. It's not necessarily automatic. We do have to put effort into it, which is different. Which, when Mashiach comes, we are not going to be. We're not going to be required to put effort into knowing Hashem, because when Mashiach comes, it says, "V'lo yilmedu ish es re'ehu." A friend will not teach each other. They will not teach each other. Leimar do'as Hashem, saying that, oh, come, let's learn, come know Hashem. Ki kulam yedu esay v'gomer, because everybody in the times of Mashiach will know Hashem. Knowledge will be in abundance. But until Mashiach comes, we have to have access to this knowledge. We have access to this knowledge through the tzaddik of the generation and the spark of Moshe Rabbeinu in every one of us. So by connecting to the tzaddikim of the generation, we reveal the spark of that tzaddik within us. Because let's remember that the soul of a tzaddik is considered a general soul. It gives life to all other souls. And we spoke about this in the 2nd parak of Tanya already. What does da'as mean besides knowledge? We know that many times in the Torah, the word da'as, vayedas Chava, for example, Adam knew Chava, he connected with her. Da'as also means connection. It is when godliness becomes tangible and real. You connect with it. So here's the thing. We've just said that it shouldn't really be complicated, because Moshe Rabbeinu said that that's what Hashem requires of us, to fear him. And if we connect to Moshe Rabbeinu, we can access this da'as, which brings about to da'as of Hashem, which brings as a result of it to fear of Hashem, and the emotions of fear and love of Hashem. So why is it so complicated? It is complicated, is it not? So because of the fact that the godly soul is enclosed in a body, and the body conceals the neshama, so a great effort is required. We are required to put in a large effort, both in the aspects of the soul and the body. So there are basically two struggles to get to a level, even a lower level, a simple level of fear of God. So what are the two main struggles? The main struggle comes from the body. We struggle against the tendencies of the body. The body wants something different. The elements of nature affect the body. The body feels cold and hot and tired and lazy and sick and whatever it is that the body does. The body drives us crazy. The body does not let us serve Hashem. The body is an obstacle to us feeling this fear of God, for us contemplating the fear of God, the knowledge of Hashem, which brings about to a fear of God. So the first aspect in the struggle to reach the level of fearing Hashem is to subdue the body. And Tanya has been speaking many, many times about different techniques we can use to subdue the body. One of them may be to splinter the body. Splintering the body, if you remember correctly, is when the light of the godly soul does not get through the coarse covering of to reach the animal soul. The animal soul is covered in a klippa, and the tactic the Alter Rebbe tells us in that chapter is to not increase the light, but to chop up the wood in order to be able to take fire easily. And that is through becoming brokenhearted and doing tshuva. And there are different techniques. But that is the process of the struggle of the body. But there also is the struggle of the soul. Because sometimes we say to ourselves, okay, I'm going to contemplate godliness now. I'm going to meditate on what I've learned in this chapter of Tanya. But for some people, it takes great effort to contemplate for a long time. Maybe someone's only able to contemplate for 1 minute. You know, today there's a lot of talk around mindfulness. Mindfulness is concentrating on something. Well, not everybody can concentrate on something for so long. That is a spiritual struggle. It is a struggle of the soul. Whereas for others, it comes easier. And for other people, they just have to contemplate godliness for a short amount of time, and their soul is already on fire, fearing and loving Hashem. Whereas for others, sometimes it's a soul struggle. It's a struggle. For some people, the process of tshuva is easier, and for others, it's harder, especially, the Alter Rebbe mentions in this parak, if we are referring to the sins of our youth. Because we have mentioned before the sins of our youth. Maybe you did tshuva for those sins already, but now you have grown. You are at a different level, so you have to re-examine the sins of your youth and redo your tshuva. So it becomes harder. But the Alter Rebbe tells us, even though there is a struggle, it is possible for everyone to attain, because just as when there is a treasure deep in the ground, how do we reach that treasure? How do we access that treasure? We dig deep, and sometimes it's difficult, and the ground is hard, and there's stones in the way, and you have to push away those stones, and you have to put in physical efforts. But it is possible to reach the treasure. One has to dig deep, and deeply enough to reach this level of fear. How do we know that you've dug deeply enough? When it affects behavior. When you are prevented from sinning, and you are motivated to do a mitzvah out of fear of Hashem's authority and might of Hashem, and the fact that Hashem is involved in your life, etc. When one puts in the effort and contemplates that Hashem knows everything, and Hashem has a personal relationship with him, and he feels that Hashem is an ayin royeh v'oizen shema'as, then you reach the level of Yiras Hashem. Now, what is an ayin roya oizen shamas? That is really, sometimes we take Hashem, who is not human and is beyond any human limitations, and we assign human qualities to him. Well, firstly, it's in order for us to understand Hashem better. That's number one. But it's also to understand different concepts. So let's take this concept of fearing, right? Usually when we talk about fearing something, it's because we see it in front of us, right? If we walk into a department store and we know there are cameras all over and we have a temptation to steal, well, we're not going to steal because there's someone watching. There's someone listening, right? Hashem, it's not so obvious that he's watching and listening, right? But when we contemplate on the fact that Hashem is involved in every aspect of our lives, according to the meditation that we learned in chapter 41. And Hashem knows every single thought that's going on in your mind. But unlike a human being, it's unrestricted. When you see something, you may need glasses, you may have binoculars, but there's still a limit to how much you can see. Hashem has no limit to how much he can see. When you hear something, you may put loudspeakers on, but there's still a limit to what a human being can hear. Hashem has no limit to what he can see and hear. And the way we can understand it to a certain extent, because obviously we cannot understand everything about Hashem, is that just as a person, like you yourself, have knowledge of everything going on in your body. You know when you're hot, you know when you're cold, you know when your toenail hurts. And the Alter Rebbe brings the example of the toenail in this chapter. You know what's going on. You are aware of everything in your body. Hashem also has total awareness of everything going on in the world, every aspect, every detail, even your very innermost thoughts in your mind. Hashem has awareness of that. However, this is a mashal. It's a parable. There are two differences in the mashal. When you are aware of what's going on in your body, what's going on in your body affects you. So if you're hot or cold, it affects you. If your toenail is hurting, it affects you. Hashem is aware of everything going on in the world, but it does not affect Hashem. Does not cause any change of Hashem, because Hashem is the origin of everything. Hashem is the creator of everything. It does not affect Hashem. And the other thing that is not similar in the mashal, and is actually a beautiful concept, is that when you're aware of everything going on in your body, you didn't choose to be aware. It's instinctive. If you bump your foot, you are aware that it hurts. If the sun is shining, you're hot. It's instinctive. You didn't choose to be hot. But Hashem, it's not instinctive by Hashem. Hashem chooses to be aware. In other words, Hashem chooses to worry about you. It's not an instinct. Hashem has a choice. Hashem chose to be aware of everything going on in the world, and specifically the nation of Israel, and specifically you yourself. He chose, and this inspires an awe in one's heart in order to avoid averos and do mitzvahs. In other words, even the nefesh elokis, the divine soul, when it's in a body, it is affected by a body. Unlike Hashem, Hashem is in this world and is completely unaffected by this world, and as yet he is aware of everything going on in the world, even your innermost thoughts that no one else is aware of. When a person contemplates this, at the beginning of each day, now the Alter Rebbe gives us really a nice tool, because you could think to yourself, well, it's kind of difficult to keep this top of mind, right? But the Alter Rebbe gives it a tool. He says, contemplate it at the beginning of the day. Contemplate at the beginning of the day how awesome Hashem is, how he has a personal relationship with you. This will affect your entire day, even if you're not thinking about it the whole entire day. Why? Because if you contemplate something in the beginning of the day, you can refresh your memory at given moments when you are tempted to do something, when something which you're about to do is not in alignment with Hashem's will. And this refreshes your memory and affects your behavior. Like, it refreshes your memory briefly. And what you contemplated in the beginning of the day is enough to last you throughout the day, because no one wants to rebel in Hashem's presence. So when you remind yourself of Hashem standing in front of you, knowing your very innermost thoughts, even if it takes a second, you will avoid sinning. And we mentioned in the last chapter, chapter 41, briefly, and here the Alter Rebbe goes into a little bit more detail about how Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai told his students that their fear of heaven should be like the fear of a human being. Now that's very interesting, because isn't Hashem much greater, much more infinite than a limited human being? Why is that? Because he told his students this, because we fear something we actually see. So we do fear human beings because we see them. We can contemplate that Hashem sees us, but in order to truly fear something, we have to see it. A person sees a king, and he is therefore afraid of the king. So how do we go about this? How do we um, align this with fear of Hashem? We don't see Hashem, and yet we are told to contemplate that he sees us, and therefore we fear him. Because we should remember that even when we see a king and we fear him, his authority, or, you could replace the king with anything that you're scared of, like any person of authority, a policeman, a judge, or whatever it is, right? But when we remember that that it's not actually the person standing in front of us, but it's who he is that makes us afraid. So in other words, when the king is sleeping, you're not afraid of the king, even if you're right next to the king sleeping. You may be afraid that the king will wake up, but you're not afraid of the king at that moment because he is sleeping. So when the king is in front of you, you're not afraid of the king's garments. You're afraid of who the king represents, the authority, the ability to rule, the ability to punish, the ability to change things at will. We are afraid of the king's panimius, his inner self, and not of his garments, even though what we see with a physical eye reminds us of what our mind's eye actually knows. So the panimius, the innermost part of a person, is only apparent in the mind, but what the physical eye sees reminds us. So in the same way, how do we awaken that about Hashem? How do we say to ourselves, well, we can't really see Hashem, but we can see his garments. We can see his world. We can look at the world. We can look at Shamayim, the Aretz, the heavens and the earth and all its hosts. We can look at the galaxies. We can inspire ourselves by looking at beautiful mountains and nature and rivers and forests and etc. And when we see that and we remember that Hashem is enclosed in creation, knowing that heaven and earth is Hashem himself, this produces this fear. In other words, we are actually looking at Hashem himself, but we just have to remind ourselves of that fact. The world is actually nullified to Hashem. Whatever Hashem, the Baal Shem Tov said that even a blade of grass only grows because Hashem tells it to grow. So it's like seeing, it's like as if you don't know what the king looks like. Today we know what everybody looks like, right? Because, it's a digital world, right? But let's say you lived in the olden days and you knew there was a king, but you didn't know what the king looked like, and you decided to go and try and have an audience with the king. So you reached the palace of the king and you walked into the courtyard and you saw ministers and guards and generals. You didn't see the king, but those people themselves inspired an awe and fear because you were in the courtyard of the king. So it's the same thing. Looking at the world around us, Shamayim, Aretz, and knowing that that is the courtyard of the king, that is Hashem, that already instills awe and fear within us. But the Alter Rebbe knows us humans, right? He ends off this chapter saying, but because of all these garments, of all the concealments, we could forget that it's Hashem, right? So the Alter Rebbe says it's a good idea to accustom one's mind to think like this, to get into the habit of thinking. It's not automatic. The Alter Rebbe acknowledges in this chapter that these things are not automatically thought about. You don't look at the sky and the earth and think this is Hashem, but we can accustom ourselves to thinking about it. We can get used to thinking that the world is not separate from Hashem. It is simply a garment. It is simply a garment. And the Alter Rebbe even includes over here the concept that even faith, which is above logic, also takes practice. It's a muscle. It takes practice and getting used to, and it's a habit to be cultivated. And then the Alter Rebbe ends off this chapter with something very beautiful, because this whole chapter has been speaking about contemplating Hashem and producing a fear of Hashem and contemplating Hashem's oneness and knowing that the world is Hashem, etc. He ends the chapter saying that a state of yira, even this lower level yira tata, is not only through contemplation, but we also have to accept upon ourselves the yoke of heaven. Why is that? It's just like the mitzvah that we have to appoint a king. Soim tasim alechem melech. We have the mitzvah to appoint a king. Because Hashem forsakes all other worlds, superior worlds, inferior worlds, the hosts, the angels, etc., and he singles us out, we have to accept. And how do we accept this? Well, first of all, there are different moments of acceptance of the Ol Malchus Shamayim, which is in Shema, and also when we bow in Shemona Esrei, we signify bittul, nullification towards Hashem, and most importantly is by doing mitzvahs as a result of fearing Hashem. In other words, you put aside your reality for Hashem's reality, the only reality that is important, and this motivates you to do mitzvahs and prevents you from sinning. And that is the second part of fearing Hashem, is not only the contemplation, but it is acceptance of the yoke of heaven upon us. So there's a lot of beautiful concepts in this chapter. There's the concept of Moshe Rabbeinu connecting to the tzaddik. There's the concept of the world, of struggling with our bodies and our souls. There's a concept of fearing Hashem as much as we fear something that we see, and looking at the world and contemplating the fact that these are actually the garments of Hashem. There's a lot of beautiful concepts in this chapter. It's nice to go over it and chew it over and contemplate, and thereby bring about this level of fear of Hashem. Any questions, observations?
I have a question about Avas Hashem. It's much easier. It seems to be much easier to have this fear than to have love for Hashem. No?
Okay, so there's different kinds of fears, right? So it's easy to have a fear of punishment, but this is not the fear of punishment. The fear that we're talking about here is the authority of Hashem, knowing that the only reality is Hashem. And in one way, it's easy because we say that Moshe Rabbeinu even said to the nation, this is what Hashem demands of you. Can't you just fear Hashem? On the other hand, it's hard simply because our godly souls are imprisoned in our animal souls, and our animal souls really obstruct us. And so that's why we have to, it's not so easy to fear Hashem. Love, on the other hand, feels good. It feels warm and fuzzy, which is why a lot of people gravitate more towards the love of Hashem. But as we said last chapter, love of Hashem has a selfish component. It feels good. It feels good. We have to have both, but the foundation is the acceptance of Hashem's authority, because then you'll do mitzvahs even when it doesn't feel so good. Yes. Does that explain a little bit?
I understand that, but I think I don't agree that the love is easier than having this fear and authority. Just like a person, as you said, like a principal, he's next to principal's office. You don't see the principal, but he's there. He could come out anytime and ask you why you're in the hallway. You're already feeling like you have to have an answer. You have to look appropriate, this and that. So, it's much easier to connect to that than to feel like, oh, my principal is the greatest principal of my school and he runs such a big.
Right. So there are different levels of fear. Again, this is not the fear of the principal coming out to punish you. This is the knowledge of Hashem's might, and that Hashem is so involved in your life. It's the authority of Hashem, that it's only Hashem, right? Of course, there are different levels within this level, right? So there's a lot of contemplation. But taking the example of the principal, if you bring it around that example, right? So what kind of an effect will it have on the student's behavior if the student only fears punishment. For the time that the student is in that school or is in the presence of the principal, he will fear the principal and behave. And I've seen this with my own children. Like if you see like very authoritarian teachers who come in, for that year, the class is very well behaved. The next year, they're jumping off the ceilings because they don't have that teacher holding them in place, right? But if the student builds upon that authority, and the authority is the foundation, builds on the authority and really comes to love the principal, then the student will behave not only out of fear of punishment, but because he loves the principal. So yes, we are discussing fear, but it's fear as a foundation for love. Let's not forget that we need both to do the mitzvahs, because the problem of only having fear or only having love, well, besides for the fact that the Alter Rebbe says that, there are the wings of the mitzvahs, right? You need both, right? That's when you have healthy emotions, a healthy dose of fear and awe and reverence of Hashem and love of Hashem. It's not enough to have both. But you do have to have a foundation, but not of necessarily fear of Hashem, fear of punishment. I'm sorry. What is fear of fear of punishment is very low level fear. It's selfish fear. Like, ooh, I'm saving my own skin. Fear in these prakim are the fear of Hashem's might, that Hashem fills the world. And even though Hashem is so mighty, he chooses me. And that instills a fear. And the fear is the motivation to do a mitzvah or to not sin. But love has to accompany it. That's the next step. The Alter Rebbe actually was going to discuss fear before love, and then he decided to change the order.
How do we know?
I think the Rebbe says in his there are commentaries that the Alter Rebbe did contemplate in which order he was going to speak. Because if you look into the next part of Tanya, Shara Yuchad Ve'emunah, Shara Yuchad Ve'emunah speaks a lot about the might of Hashem, right? The oneness of Hashem. Hashem created the world, and the Alter Rebbe was going to put that first.
Right.
And then the Alter Rebbe decided to change the order and put this, because maybe we connect more with what's going on in our own hearts, But
can this concept be also applied for husband and wife relationship?
can you be more specific?
Also, like, does respect and awe come before the love?
Right. Well, respect is a foundation, but it can't be only respect.
Right.
Has to be both. But yes, but if you have love without respect, there is something lacking.
Right.
Because yes, in a relationship is actually a very good way to explain it, because people love each other because it feels good. There's a selfish component. Especially in the beginning of a marriage. In the beginning of marriage, it's ava shetluya b'davar. You love a person because they make you feel good. Over time, it becomes ava she'ena tluya b'davar, unconditional love, but without respect on both sides, it doesn't. You'll do what you like, not what the other person wants or needs. Respect takes out the selfish component of love. Yes, takes out the ego. I'm just going to stop the recording, and in case anyone wants to